The problem with gender media awards is that they do not celebrate excellence, but they literally divide that excellence based on the identity you were born with innately from birth, which is often based off lottery, because no one can either choose what gender they are actually going to be born with, right? This tells us, Judge, that talent with these gender-based categories should be separated. That means that men and women essentially cannot be on the same stage and they cannot be judged based on the same criteria. The premise here is that the only thing gender-based categories reinforce is literally this misogynistic idea that women cannot compete with men without any sort of external help. Take this as an example. Both men and women are able to win the Oscars, but in different categories. But the issue is often the fact that male roles are often more complex and more career defining, but female roles are, let's say, much more on the supporting side, on the romantic side, or essentially the secondary role, right? This means that male awards tend to be seen as then much more prestigious and competitive than female because they have fewer high quality roles. And this is what we're standing against in this debate when we abolish these gender-based categories. I'm incredibly proud to propose. Let's set a few things up as OG here in this debate, right? Firstly, I want to clearly define what do these gender media awards look like, right? We think that these are categories that simply split by genders, right? For example, actresses vs an actor, and these are always going to be based on the gender of those artists in the first place. And do notice that in most cases, this means that we're not giving men and women equal positions to compete in. That means that we categorize their roles in movies also distinctly. We posit that this conforms with most likely the traditional norms, roles, and expectations on these men and women, which essentially entrenches that like the idea of like inequality to begin with. We don't want this in this debate then. Secondly, the reason why media awards are divided into a dichotomy is because of the difference in their roles rooted on gender-based stereotypes that are extremely detrimental to gender equality. For example, thinking that women are often attached to roles such as like being housewives in a movie, so there should be a separate distinction and assessment criteria of who actually performs that role the best, or let's say that men are simply usually just breadwinners and the head of families in movies. So essentially, you attach really the feminine and masculine roles in these movies based on the awards that already exist, which we think is no longer reflecting this much more progressive society we live in. So therefore, there's just less ways to actually reinvent a much more inclusive roles in movies as a result of the existence of these gender based categories, right? Thirdly, then, the premise of this characterization, Judge, is that with these gender-based awards, it becomes inherently harmful for especially women who cannot partake in, let's say, more modern roles such as being a businesswoman in a movie. So the portrayal of media itself will also be actually influenced by this existence of these existence of these gender-based categories in the first place. What we want on our side is simple. We would not remove awards entirely, but we think that we're able to create some sort of like equal ground for women to compete with men in these diverse roles, not only limited to roles that are seen as much more feminine, right? We would bite the bullet and tell you then, abolishing here means that we would eradicate the gender-based categories completely, but still have categories that are gender neutral. So literally anyone could win the award, i.e. just in general the best lead performance or just the best performance, which looks like currently existing like award shows like MTV Movie and other awards, right? Therefore, I want to then posit a quick urgency here. We think that these awards are literally not even necessary anymore because in categories that aren't separated by gender, for example, the Grammys Best New Artist Awards, women have won every single year for nearly the past 10 years, right? Also, these art industries are nothing like sports where men are biologically like stronger and faster. No gender is inherently like more talented or more geared to producing a certain type of music anyways. So then moving on to my arguments then. Firstly, about why is this not true inclusivity the moment you try to actually have this gender-based categories, because opposition will come into this debate and literally tell you that this creates some sort of inclusivity because both of them can actually have ways or have opportunities to win any sort of awards. But before moving on, are there any POIs? 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, then let me move on, right? Firstly, I want to prove to you why it's not true inclusivity. Notice that these categories structurally exclude a certain type of individual, which is non-binary individuals. Note panels that these types of categories are not at all inclusive because they literally exclude these types of like non-binary artists. And in most cases, these artists have to choose whether they want to compete then in women's category or the men's category, essentially suppressing their true identity, right? And note that how is this actually so harmful? I think this is because of two reasons. One, these people's gender identities are tied to who they are and how they're actually going to be perceived by society. This is also tied to things like dignity. Forcing them to choose a box that they don't even resonate with to begin with or identify with it is literally very alienating. This itself means and tells you that it's not inclusive. Secondly, non-binary individuals are also very discriminated in today's society. So if they choose one gender, people will likely say that so you're not non-binary, you do identify with one gender, and people will question that identity that they have. So essentially, what is this premise of this argument is the fact that they're left with a trade-off, right? Either they maintain their personal dignity and identity, or they have to receive some sort of recognition for their hard work, for their art, for something that they poured blood and sweat and tears to. And we think that this is just inherently unfair. Especially notice in today's progressive world, things are already changing, and we want to actually allow that middle ground where any sort of genders can actually participate and compete in an equal level ground. Secondly, then, I want to prove why this is not real gender equality. Note that these gender separated categories are really only symbolic fronts for art industries to say they're actually trying to fight for gender equality. The real issue don't really lie on the fact that it's about casting or who gets chosen for a certain record label, right? Why? A couple of reasons here. Firstly, art depends on talent and marketability, right? A woman who is extremely talented at singing or writing music, let's say, with that star quality isn't going to be passed over for an average man. This is intuitive because record labels and agency, for instance, have to do a risk assessment, which artists will get them essentially, i.e., more profit, right? Because inherently these types of agencies are always profit oriented in nature. In this hypothetical world, then they're gonna choose the female artist at the end of the day. Secondly, typically in roles like acting as well, characters are specifically written for certain people, as in female character isn't going to be casted as a male actor. The real issue in the art industry then, judges, is exploitation and the sexual harassment that exists specifically for these female artists. There's also then a lack of diversity as a result in these types of executive boards. Note that these categories then do practically nothing to fix it. It's just a shield that art industries can hide behind and say nothing needs to be changed because we already achieved quote unquote gender equality. I mean, we're already trying to fight for gender equality by separating these two categories, but this is literally ultimately untrue. This works because this famous actors in the public eye gains more visibility than some random corporate executive, for example. Moving on to the second then, how it lowers the prestige of awards. Note panels that these type of categories that separate the two genders make it seem like the achievements and awards of female singers or actresses are not just equivalent to those achievements of men. And we think this separation itself already makes it seem like women cannot actually win on their own, that they don't have the qualities to become like men. And we think that that's inherently not inclusive. For all those reasons then, I'm incredibly proud to propose this.
So media awards play a critical role in recognizing talent, celebrating achievement, and shaping the way society perceives excellence in acting, filmmaking, or storytelling. And for decades, award shows have created categories that differentiate nominees based on gender, such as best actor or best actress. And these categories were originally designed to ensure fairness and representation in a historically male-dominated industry, right? And while some argue that gendered awards are outdated, the underlying problem is far more complex than a simple label. It concerns visibility, recognition, and the way in which we measure artistic merit. And abolishing gendered awards risks undermining these key functions. So one of the central roles of awards is to highlight the talent that might go otherwise unnoticed, right? And historically, women in film and media have faced systemic discrimination, leading to fewer roles or limited opportunities for recognition. And by having separate categories, award shows guarantee that female performers and creators receive the spotlight and acknowledgement they deserve. And without this separation, many excellent performers might be overlooked in favor of male nominees. And gender awards also create meaningful conversation and inspiration because when young artists watch award ceremonies, seeing women and men recognized separately allows audiences to identify role models, aspire toward achievements in a space historically shaped by gender inequality. And by removing these categories risks sending a subtle message that female performers are not equally capable, or that their achievements must compete directly against those who might have systemic advantages. And another overlooked issue is contextual fairness in performance evaluation. So acting roles can differ significantly by gender, genre, or narrative focus and social contexts, right? And gendered categories like provide a way to recognize diverse stories that might otherwise be marginalized. So like for example, a film focusing on like a woman's experience might like compete in its own category and gain the recognition it deserves. Whereas like in a combined category, it might be overlooked by like a more traditionally marketable like male-led performances, not because the performance is weaker, no, thank you, but because of social and industry biases. So in this debate, we've defined our key terms clearly. So gendered media awards refer to like award categories that separate nominees by gender, such as like best actor versus actress. And by abolish, we mean that we're eliminating this separation entirely, combining all nominees into like a single category. So we frame the debate around fairness, visibility, and cultural impact. So while our opponents like may argue about like from the perspective of like equality and competition, we argue from the perspective of structural fairness. It's not like enough to treat all like, nominees as equal on paper when the system surrounding them is still unequal. So the model we propose is simple. So we retain gendered awards, but continuously improve inclusivity in terms of like non-binary representation and nomination criteria. So rather than abolishing categories entirely, award bodies can consider introducing additional like categories or like mechanisms to recognize non-binary performance without eliminating the existing categories that protect women from like systemic underrepresentation. So some rebuttals to the OG. So they said that this creates a real inclusivity or like gender equality, but their claim of like real inclusivity is like fundamentally flawed because it confuses symbolic equality with actual equality. So simply merging categories doesn't remove like bias, but it just hides it. So in a world where men like still dominate like lead roles, budgets, and visibility, combining categories means women are now competing in a space where they're like structurally disadvantaged. And that is not like inclusivity, that's like more like exposure to unfair competition. They also said that gendered awards lower prestige, but this claim is turned as like what actually creates prestige because prestige like doesn't come from like how many people you compete against, but from how meaningful and credible the recognition is. So the gendered awards like maintain credibility by ensuring that winners are like actually chosen in a fair and context-aware system rather than like one distorted by structural bias. So moving on to our arguments, our first argument is about how gendered awards entrench stereotypes. So gendered awards, by separating nominees into like a best actor or best actress, reinforce the notion that men and women should be evaluated differently. And instead of promoting equality, these categories signal that male and female performances are inherently incomparable, which can perpetuate harmful societal stereotypes about what men and women can or cannot do. So this separation implies that women should like be recognized in their own category while men compete in theirs, which subtly like communicates that women cannot measure up to men in the same place. So such like messaging seeps into like public perception, right, and shaping what audiences expect from actors of like different genders. And by maintaining these categories, award shows unintentionally like promote binary thinking about gender roles because this can affect casting decisions, storytelling, or like even the types of roles considered like award worthy. So for example, roles emphasizing physicality or like leadership often go to men, while like emotional or like supportive roles often go to like women, reinforcing traditional stereotypes. So these gendered awards also limit the scope of recognition because when women are funneled into like a separate category, the evaluation is often based on criteria that align with societal expectations of femininity, while male categories reward traits associated with like power and dominance. So the societal impact of reinforcing gender stereotypes is significant because young actors internalize these norms, believing that certain roles or like traits are for men or like for women, limiting like ambition and creativity. So gendered awards can therefore like stifle like talent by framing expectations too narrowly. So moving on to our second argument, it's about how these awards preserve artistic diversity or like industry diversity. Because gendered awards exist to acknowledge different types of artistic performance, right? So men and women are often offered roles that emphasize distinct like qualities, so like emotional depth, physicality, leadership, and relational dynamics or like vulnerability. And by keeping categories separate, award shows can fairly recognize excellence in like each type of performance, like rather than forcing very different styles into a single comparison. So combining categories risks like no, thank you, rewarding only the most visible or traditional celebrated performances, usually those written for men or aligning with masculine like archetypes, while marginalizing subtle, nuanced like performances often seen in female-led roles. So gendered awards prevent this by creating space for diverse storytelling and to be appreciated on its own terms. So the separation also allows different genres and storylines to thrive. So historically, male actors dominate like action, epic, or like high-profile commercial films, whereas like women are often featured in like dramas or like character-driven stories, right? So gendered awards ensures like both types of performances are celebrated rather than like forcing all roles into a single competitive lens. So what's the impact of this? So the impact is greater artistic recognition and career opportunities because actors can be celebrated for performances that might not like fit the dominant mode, like allowing for like a richer, like more nuanced industry. And this ensures that talent is recognized across like a wide range of styles. And gendered awards also encourage writers, directors, and producers to create diverse roles. So if the awards like reward different types of performance fairly, the industry has like incentive to invest in roles that explore complexity, emotion, and character development rather than like only commercially dominant male-led stories. Finally, for our audiences, the impact is exposure to like a variety of stories and experiences, right? Because gendered awards like highlight performances that may otherwise be overshadowed, like providing viewers like, with a broader cultural perspective.
Fine.
So proud to propose.
If opposition wants award shows to have separate gender categories because women are structurally disadvantaged in the art industry and to improve inclusivity, then why not have genders based on race? And if they want to improve artistic diversity, why not have separate categories based on genre? We are the side that pushes for true equality and true improvement of the art industry through removing these gender-based qualities. For these reasons, both side go. Now, 3 things to expect for my first speech. Firstly, a clash on gender equality, visibility, and inclusivity. And secondly, a clash on artistic impact on the art industry, right? Now, and finally, a new substantive on actual impact on the art industry and removing barriers, right? Now, firstly, moving on to my first issue on gender equality, visibility, and inclusivity. So opposition essentially told you that acting roles can vary based on gender, and it's just not fair to judge these different genres and different types of performances in the same category. And I don't think this really makes sense, panels, because why would you judge different creative directions differently? Why should there be separate categories for different genres, different stories? Because that's different stories. That literally goes against the point of art for all these diverse genres, diverse perspectives to these award shows, because all these different perspectives and different stories have to be like compared in these competitions, right? And in that case, why not just have categories that are based on genres instead of based on gender? And I also just gave you no analysis as to why, for example, in different spectrums of the art industry, like the music industry, women would be more geared to producing pop music, or R&B, while men would be just more geared to producing different genres like rap music, right? There's just no clear analysis here on why, firstly, acting roles and music that is produced by by different genders should be separated and are inherently different. Secondly, panels, I think we can just flip this claim, right? Because here, they're just clearly pushing for the perpetuation that women get these stereotypical roles. Like a woman should have to always act as a nurturing character, a housewife, or a mother, while men can get these strong, resilient, heroic and stoic characters, right? I think that the logic here is that a lot of big studios, if they invest hundreds of millions into a movie, or at least millions of dollars into a movie, they want the prestige of that movie winning an award. They want their actors and their direction to be recognized. And it's also a matter of pride, right? Because then their studio seems like it's better, that is more prestigious, and they would also garner more investors. So if gender categories were eliminated and abolished, then you just get these women dipping into more diverse roles. They get better scripts, better quality stories to make them more competitive against the men that they're going to be competing in these categories, right? Now, they also told you that women are just structurally disadvantaged here. And that's why we still need these types of categories to maintain equality. I think opposition is literally just knifing their case in the back here, right? Because obviously we do concede to the fact that there are structural barriers with women facing sexual harassment and exploitation at a much greater scale in the art industry. But we told you that either way, but we told you the way the art industry actually justifies these kind of structural issues is just, and not taking any action against these issues, is that they use these type of gender-based categories. They can point to these awards and go, oh, but look, we're giving these women proper recognition and visibility, despite the structural barriers that still persist. We are still trying to fight for gender equality, while they take no actual action to fix these real underlying issues. These type of categories, again, are just a shield for the art industry to maintain a lack of diversity in executive boards, to maintain this type of level of this really harmful level of exploitation. Now, moving on to my second issue on artistic quality. Basically, opposition told you that women and men are just given different roles and they just cannot compete with each other. Panels, I really just don't understand this at this point again because different genres are still judged in the same category and they can still compete with each other. And again, I already told you that intuitively, big studios want to win awards because they want to see a return on the project they invested so much in, right? They want to win prestige to attract more investors and to make that return on investment. This means that they would not only this means on their side they would only try to produce a strong male role, and instead of having characters that have qualities that are not just tied to their own gender, and on their side artistic value should not maximize at all. And I think we are able to create the single competitive standard that pushes the entire art industry to create better, more inclusive performances that can be more competitive and compete with each other equally, right? Now, finally, on my extension on impact on the actual art industry. So the thesis of this argument is very simple. We think that the art industry should just thrive for equality, not hiding that inequality and just painting themselves as diverse, right? Just by performatively having these gender-based awards. Three things to note. Firstly, the inception of gender-based awards itself is already knifing women in their back by saying that they have to have a separate, less competitive category because they don't have the qualities to compete with men. It's just inherently belittling to women to begin with, and it perpetuates this damsel in distress idea where they need external help. And we think that currently the art industry becomes less competitive the moment that you actually reduce and divide categories into small ones, because one winner category with one winner shows that it has a higher bar and that the best of the best are just competing with each other, and it's much more selective than having a category with two categories with one winner each, causing two winners for best actor, best actress, right? So you effectively just double the number of top performers here. Therefore, these awards are just less meaningful, and we think the art industry should ultimately award artists in a meaningful way, not only in a way that represents symbolic equality. Let me also tell you then why prestige is often attached with numbers, especially with the awards. So take this analogy. You can't deny the fact that joining international competitions, which is more wide scale, is more prestigious than joining national competitions, which have less diversity and less participants. So that's the same logic here applies to these art competitions. And on recognition, I think we do think with artists being in the with recognition, these female artists or whoever's winning just gets more recognition for their hard work, and that's benefits these artists on an individual level. So then what is the impact we have towards our industry by abolishing it? We think and we encourage men and women to take on different diverse roles and for writers to produce higher quality stories and more diverse stories. And we think art then reflects more modern values because art is political and should take on modern values and should change as society does change as well. And expression also does not rely on gender to begin with. So we improve and we take away these stereotypes instead of perpetuating them. And for all these reasons, I have never been prouder to propose.
First, we on opposition argue that we are not making a claim about women's ability, but we're making a claim about the industry they operate in. We're not saying women are less capable. We're saying the system is unequal. Ignoring that doesn't create an equality, but it locks in unfair outcomes. There's a clear difference with that. And women are equally capable, and we believe that so, but they do not receive the same opportunities, budgets, or promotion as men do. Ignoring the reality does not empower women, but it erases the barriers they face in reality. Their framing tries to twist our argument into something offensive, but it's actually quite the opposite because recognizing structural disadvantage is how you address inequality, not reinforce it. If you pretend the system is already equal, you remove any justification for policies that protect fair recognition. First, let me rebut to the previous speakers. So the first speaker on opening gov talks about how they say that we exclude because artists choose and it's tied to who they are, and there's it's only symbolic for art industries, and art depends on ability, right? However, our side would rather lead to equality because directors would care about both genders to uplift their company's reputation, right? And by doing that, they're trying to make best media, whether it's movies or something out of both genders, so the benefits would rather happen on our side because our first speaker said, no thank you. Systematically, women would be in a more unlucky position. I'll take your POI. I'll take your POI. Oh.
Don't you
Okay.
think that on your side, artists would have more on our side, artists would have more autonomy and freedom to literally express anything they want, and it does not have any it does not have to be tied with like gender roles. On your side, this is not the case. How would you then achieve the ultimate purpose of art? Please engage.
No, because art is about ability and it's more like autonomy, right? But then if there's like men and women together, then there's gonna be like unfairness, right? Because there's like bias and like that's like all inevitable in society. We can't stop that from happening. But then really what the thing we can do is actually just like separate them. So there's like because they're great on like they have like slightly different criterias that can actually like change like their rankings, right? So by doing that, we're actually like giving them more opportunities and we're like actually like enforcing like equality on our side. Moving on. So like they talk about like why would you judge differently and why is like different and like why is it different? Why and it goes against the diversity. To rebut to that, although it is based on genre, like it's still very like broad and like each genre has like different aspects, right? Whether it's like R&B or hip hop. Like not only that, but there are gonna be different criteria, as like we mentioned, based on the acting style, based on movie characters, like the characters in the movies, like gender or like aura they give out, right? Or like the vocal range, right? Differences will always remain, and we're going to make it more equal. And their model on genre is unrealistic and hard to implement, right? It goes against stereotypical words. Wait, stereotypical worlds because and if it's abolished, women don't get more diverse roles, and um so like they said that and like to go against that like not only are there inequality amongst judges but judges will have the propensity to like write things based on one gender, right? Besides in movies there are characters like male leads and like female leads, and it's inconvenient that male and female actors like compete against each other on this. We're not saying that performances are judged by different standards of quality. Good acting is still good acting, but what we're saying is that performances happen in different contexts and fair judging requires understanding those contexts, right? Ignoring context doesn't like create fairness. It creates blind spots where bias can dominate. And not no, we wouldn't like be only focusing on a strong male role because directors would have not only the incentive to make both genders strong, like will like have not only the incentive to like make both genders strong because like to have like a better reputation, but then like however like still it's like it's inconvenient that like male and female actors like go against each other and like that the benefits are more likely to happen on our side. And they also say that like this encourages diversity of roles. This sounds nice in theory, but it completely misunderstands what actually drives role diversity. Actors don't choose roles based on award categories. They choose based on what roles are written, funded, and offered to them. The real limitation is on the supply side, not on whether awards are merged or separated, right? In fact, merging categories can do the opposite, where there's only one standard of what is award worthy, the industry starts to converge toward that standard, right? That usually means roles that are more visible, dramatic, or traditionally dominant, like roles that are historically skew male. Like this actually reduces diversity of roles because everyone is pushed towards the same type of performance. So let me rebuild on our case and way. So our first speaker said like talks about how it trenches stereotypes and preserves artistic diversity, right? And our kings talk about how like females and males are separated, like singers awards, actress awards are like different categories. And then judge this debate is about equality. The main thing we should like be debating on is the equality based on which side can provide the most equality. Well, side up provides more equality, and here's why. Okay, one, there are less stereotypes and gender bias. Many people judge based on gender. Some directors prefer males over females and vice versa, right? Um, Two, directors would provide as much media on both sides as possible to win. Three, we're actually getting letting both females and males have a chance in both sides. And for even if what they say is true on like identity, our point or like the main point or like the main point like that we're trying to like go for is not to give actors like an identity crisis, but mainly we're aiming to separate the words so that evaluation is more fair. Everyone is graded or like judged with the same expectation and criteria as everyone else, right? Men and women aren't the same and often don't contain the same categories. When categories or types of music, like they produce weights like what they produce get way too different. Like comparison gets hard, right? And like it's like instead of risking equality, like
awards should just implement gender awards and like so that everyone is graded in the same way to like maximize equality, right? Like moving on like to our like last argument, which is like if there are best actress awards, then movie like actors will target those categories and make more like female presence in media. And they will have like more incentive to like get their actors to win the prize, right? That means that movie directors would make more movies with women to show women power and like enhance the idea of like women power, right? Not only that, like directors will also make movies based on just men or about men. The impact of this is that first, movies or directors, like whether it's about movies or singing, the singers, they will try to make the best content for both genders. Not only more good media is being produced, but there's both similar amounts of media per gender, right? Going forward, this motion is rather going to enforce more gender equality on our side. Never been more proud to propose. Thank you.
Our opponents have given you a nice feel-good speech about inclusivity and tried to present it as a complete case. They sound more like they're running a school campaign rather than dealing with a real structural problem. The problem is mainly that their world focuses on how things look and how people feel, and then assumes this will somehow fix everything underneath. On our side, Judge, we explain how the system actually changes how people grow and who gets real recognition and power. So we do believe that the opening mostly framed this debate around inclusivity, which is allowed to compete, who is allowed to compete, and who feels represented, how welcoming the system looks. That's fine, but it is a very shallow way to evaluate the whole situation, Judge. Even if we grant them some sort of improvement or inclusivity, our bench still wins because we talk about what kind of people the system produces and who ends up holding real social power. In our MG speech, we will explain how gender competition creates one-sided and gender development instead of like a multi-dimensional growth. So that changes the skills that people build, the roles they make, and the quality of leaders and workers we get. So we do believe that our speech is not only about the feelings, but also about the actual capacities. So now moving on to our extensions, and first extension is on multidimensional development. In the current status quo, people only compete with those within their gender group. This means that the actors or actresses are limited in some aspects while pushed too hard in others, leading often to unilateral development. So, for example, men are encouraged to be strong, competitive, and also dominant. They're often equipped with abilities, for example, like how to use swords or like fighting and such. While women are encouraged to be attractive, supportive, and also caring with abilities to dance, sing, and such. Because rewards and praises are given inside these gender-based groups, individuals focus on improving the traits that they are already super good at and that help them stand out inside their own gender group. However, if however, in their world, Judge, people do not really fully develop in a multi-dimensional way since that they only focus on one single aspect. This leads to unilateral development. They grow strongly in a few gender traits while also ignoring many other important skills. So instead of building a wide range of abilities, for example, like the empathic leadership, and also, for example, like creativity and such, many are being shaped to fit a narrow gender box. So this overall limits their personal potential for growth, and we do believe that that overall is not beneficial for the actors or like actresses' growth. Second extension on how there would be competition compression, and there's a loss of access to societal recognition. So in this case, we do believe that a lot of recognition is split into like gender categories with citizens, like for example, separate awards best actor versus best actress, and separate list top like female CEOs instead of top CEOs. This creates what we call as competition compression. That means that instead of one big and open competition for everyone to compete in, we simply like we simply believe that for most of the people, recognition is broken into smaller gender groups that often have lower statuses overall because and we do believe that very few people, usually men, enter the main high percentage of the recognition space that is seen as neutral or universal. We already see this in the status quo, and that kind of means that the impact is the loss of access to the real societal recognition for many people, since that they receive less media attention and fewer chances to become widely known role models. They also miss out on important follow-up benefits of recognition, for example, like better job promotions or like office and such. And some people, often male dominated spaces, are being over recognized because many competitors are being filtered out by like the gendered barriers. Others, for example, like the women and also the gender minorities, are under recognized even when they're equally or even more talented. So we do actually believe that having them compete in a full group would be able to let all beings sing, since our opponents are simply leading to unfair outcomes and less trust in the merit. Judge, now explaining why closing is not just repeating the opening, but how like we're also opening the debate. But before that, any points of information? Okay, so scene 9 and no engagement. So we do believe that the opening mostly talked about inclusivity, who gets to compete and who also feels doesn't just decide who plays. We actually show we do believe that our what the opening stated is important, but it only looks at who enters the system, but does not really focus on their further development when they do enter. So closing goes further in these two ways. First of all, we do believe that we focus on the multidimensional development. We have already shown to you how like gendered competition doesn't just decide who plays, but also shapes how people grow as a human being and also as a role model of many. Because people only compete inside their gender groups, they overall develop a stereotype to themselves in which they only focus on special gender traits while missing out on the others. So in this case, they overdevelop a few gender traits and never become fully multidimensional. This changes the kind of workers, or like the actors or actresses that the art sector really would opt for. And second of all, we do believe the competition compression and like recognition block people from real societal recognition. Many people are stuck in like lower status and gendered awards and never reach the top levels of prestige, power, and opportunities. So while opening talks about who feels included, closing talks about what kind of people the system creates and who actually gets a power. That is a deeper and more important level of analysis. Thus, we're very proud to propose
panels. I don't think the question of this debate is which side best has like least gender equality anymore, because I think both sides have stated very clearly that they're both trying hard not to have it, with propositions saying that they would abolish gender awards, take on modern values, saying to us that they are trying to reduce it. But instead, the question is whether which side give the least amount of harm, especially to the artists and the jobs that they do. Before moving forward, I'll be addressing on what I'll be speaking on today. Firstly, about our identity, then moving on to our stance, then on to my rebuttals, and lastly, my extension. Firstly, let me address the reason on why we're different from our opening half, Judge. The reason is because of two things. Firstly, let's start with opening government. They kept pushing that when we don't abolish gender media awards, we keep, like, for example, LGBTQ artists into boxes like best actress and best actors to be able to compete, that they won't even want to be in it. But we say that this problem is just overstated and affects a very small number of like people compared to the wider industry, and it doesn't actually stop anyone from performing, getting roles, or being able to be successful. And instead, we propose that we should keep gender categories for now while improving on how awards recognize performance overall. For example, by strengthening the judging standards, increasing the transparency and accountability, and making sure performances are evaluated properly within each category. The reason why this solution is better is because on their side, their priorities like labels, and we believe that on our side we should prioritize things like fair competition and accurate recognition, because that is what actually shapes careers and opportunities, making it more important. And secondly, moving on to what OO Bench mentioned, they argued that gender awards entrenches stereotypes. And even if we agree that this is true, we tell you that this is something that we wouldn't want to bring a lot of importance to. The reason why we say this is because awards themselves are not what creates those stereotypes. Those come from deeper issues like casting choices, writing, and who gets funded in the first place. So even if you remove gender categories, right, those stereotypes don't just suddenly magically disappear. All you've done is change the label, not the system behind it. not something significant, which is not something significant that we should take into account. So now moving on to my rebuttals. So firstly then, they claim that on proposition side, that artists will be able to receive more autonomy and freedom to express themselves. But we said that this freedom is mostly symbolic and doesn't actually change how much control artists have over their careers. Because at the end of the day, actors don't choose how they are categorized in awards. They choose their roles, and their roles are still shaped by the directors, the producers, and the industry. Removing gender categories doesn't suddenly give them more control over. I won't be taking that. Removing gender categories doesn't just suddenly give them more control over their stories they tell or how they actually express themselves. What actually limits their freedom is the kind of roles that they are offered and the opportunities that they actually receive. Not the name of the award, not the name of an award category at the end of the year. So even if you remove these labels, their day-to-day creative freedom would just stay the same. So finally, I'll be moving on to my one argument about how removing it would remove meritocracy. So firstly, then on context, in the current status quo, the film industry is not this playing level field. Even though things are still improving, men still get leading roles or more complex character and more opportunities to shine, women are still given fewer choices. And when they do not get roles, not taking that, thank you. Gendered awards exist in this context, not because men and women to be separated forever, but because the system itself is still unequal. So two layers of analysis for this then. Firstly, removing gendered categories actually harms meritocracy instead of actually improving it. In theory, one big best actor or best actress category sounds fair on the surface level because everyone competes equally, right? But in reality, when these opportunities are already unequal in the first place, combining the categories just basically means the group with more exposure, which is usually men, will dominate the awards. So instead of rewarding the best performance overall, you end up rewarding the people who had the most chances to succeed in the first place. And that panels isn't just true merit, that's just reflecting the existing bias that already exists in the industry. So secondly, gender awards actually push the industry towards fairness rather than away from it. These categories guarantee visibility for women at the highest level, which would pressure the studios to create better roles and invest in more of female talent. Awards shape is what get funded, what gets attention, and what the audience actually values. So without the separate categories, there's really less incentive to prioritize diversity in their storytelling because recognition becomes harder to achieve for already unrepresented groups. And on a deeper level, recognition isn't just symbolic, right? It has real career impact. Winning or even being nominated for an award can define an actor's future opportunities. If women are less likely to less likely in to win a combined category, they would lose out of those career boosts. That would mean that fewer women in leading roles in the future which again reduces competition and quality overall. So instead of moving towards more equality, abolishing gendered awards actually just slows it down more. So for some weighing, Judge, the reason why as opposition and also as a closing half we win this debate is because we showed you on why our substance matters more than the open government has mentioned in their speech. We showed you that by create real fairness, but instead weakens the meritocracy by allowing existing inequalities to decide who wins. And we showed you that these awards are still necessary to ensure equal recognition and opportunities in an unequal industry. And that's why we are so proud to stand in opposition. Thank you.
What opening government have given you is a reason for you to like this policy, but what we are going to do is explain why this policy is actually necessary if you care about how the film industry functions. Because this debate is not simply about whether gender equality is desirable to both sides. The debate is about what kind of system of recognition could actually change who gets power and who gets the opportunities, and how the industry will actually evolve over time as well. Both sides in the debate are treating awards as if they're primarily about fairness or representation, but we think that this is fundamentally the wrong way to understand them. They tell the industry who is valuable, who should be invested in, and who defines the excellence going forward. So the question for this entire debate is which system would produce signals that could actually change the industry behavior. Let me first deal with the way that opposition tries to characterize this debate, right? They suggest that we're ignoring the structural inequality in the industry, but what they're actually doing is shifting the debate away from solutions into sympathy, because at no point they have explained how their models actually change the underlying structure they themselves describe. They tell you that women face harassment harassment, women receive fewer leading roles, women are structurally disadvantaged. We agree with all of that, but I think the question in this debate is not whether the inequality exists, but rather what kind of recognition system would change the inequality. Let me first deal with the opposition's point, right? What they're trying to do is shift the debate away from the solutions. They tell you that women are facing all of these, but opening government identifies the problem and tells you what gender categories are unfair. Opening opposition identifies the problem, tells you that women need protection, but neither side actually explains so far what happens if their model is implemented. When closing opposition tells you that they care about structural inequality, they're actually defending a system that stabilizes it, because as long as separate categories still exist, the industry can always point to those outcomes and say that we are inclusive, we are recognizing women, there's no pressure to change anything else. Our model removes the shield to the industry, because if inequality persists, it becomes visible under our side, and if women are not winning, it becomes a problem that cannot be hidden anymore. And in an industry that is driven by reputation and scarce prestige that they could only assign to a few people and public scrutiny, the visibility creates pressure for anyone to do actual reform. That's the difference between our side and theirs, and they manage inequality, but we force the industry to confront their problems. Now I want to move on to the point where closing opposition talks about that the awards are not the ones that create stereotypes. I think that awards do not exist in isolation. They actually influence what kind of performances are being valued, what kind of roles are being given, and what audiences come to expect. So when you separate awards by gender, you're essentially institutionalizing the difference between people, because you're telling the industry that performances should be evaluated within gender silos, and this shapes people's behavior, which means that writers create roles that fit those expectations, and studios invest in narratives that align with the award recognition. So while awards are not the only source of the stereotypes of the differences between the genders, they're also a reinforcing mechanism. Therefore, we tell you that removing them still doesn't magically erase bias, but removing it is a key structure that legitimizes and produces it. But then on their point that the freedom for actors is symbolic, right? I think awards are one of the strongest signals in the industry for who gets the cast and who gets funding and influence. When recognition is being segmented, it produces weaker signals. A performer that is recognized within a limited category is not perceived in the same way as one who competes across the entire field. So under our model, when someone wins, they're being recognized as the best overall. That changes how they're being valued by the public. So while they are correct that awards do not directly assign those roles, they're wrong to say that it is merely symbolic that we give them the freedom, right? They shape the market perception of talent, which directly affects people's career outcomes. So even under their framing of control and opportunity, we still win the debate because we improve the overall quality and strength of recognition that leads to those outcomes. But then finally, on meritocracy and how women gets crowded out even when we combine the categories, this argument concedes a central point that they admit the system is unequal, but their solution is still to preserve a structure that accommodates the inequality. Gendered categories do not create meritocracy for either side. They create separate tracks that avoid confronting the differences between the genders. In their world, inequality still persists, but outcomes are adjusted for them to look balanced. But in our world, inequality becomes visible, and therefore it becomes something that the industry must respond to. Because once the categories are being removed, if women are not winning, this becomes a reputation problem for the industry and a legitimacy problem and a pressure point for them to reform. Thus, two clashes and weighing in between. No, not going to accept that. Clash one is what recognition actually does. Opening government asks you to evaluate this debate in terms of fairness and inclusion, while opposition asks you to protect the representation through separate categories. Both sides implicitly treat reward as these symbolic gestures, as something that make people feel seen or included or fairly treated. But our problem with both of them is that they stop at that level. They never explain to us what awards actually do beyond the ceremony itself. We tell you that awards are not recognition in the moment. They're also one of the strongest mechanisms for the industry for them to distribute long-term power. Therefore, winning an award determines who gets the cast leading roles, who gets the funding, who gets the bankable, and who is seen as defining the standard of excellence in this field. This means that the value of an award is not just whether someone wins, but whether someone meaningfully changes their position in the industry. Under opposition's world, women do receive awards, but they receive them within a separate and parallel track. This means that their recognition is implicitly framed in the excellence within a subgroup rather than an excellence across the entire field. They are never directly compared against a full pool of performers. As a result, their awards carry less weight as a whole as a universal signal for superiority. But in our world, when categories are being abolished, every winner emerges from a single competition pool. This means that when someone wins, they're not just the best within their gender, but they're the best overall. This creates a qualitatively stronger form of recognition for these people, one that is harder to achieve and more credible, more transferable into real and long-term opportunities. But on second clash of managing inequality, right, opposition's central claim is that gendered categories act as a necessary corrective mechanism to an unequal industry, right? Opening government response by saying that categories themselves are discriminatory and should be removed. Both sides are incomplete. This is where CG becomes decisive, because the key question is not whether gender inequality exists. The question is what kind of system actually changes the inequality. Opposition's model manages inequality, but they don't ever challenge it, because we tell you that gendered categories allow the industry to maintain existing while still appearing inclusive, because they say, oh, we separate categories, we're still inclusive. As long as there are female winners in a separate category, the industry can point to those outcomes as proof of progress. Opening government, they're dictionarily correct in wanting to abolish categories, but they fail to explain what happens with the change. Their case lacks a mechanism for why the abolition leads to improvement. If women are underrepresented among winners, the inequality is no longer hidden within a separate category. It becomes visible and it becomes undeniable, and also reputationally damaging for the industry. Studios and producers and all the award institutions can no longer rely on the separate categories to demonstrate how inclusive they are. They're being forced to confront the disparity directly. And this pressure matters for all the industries, because in an industry driven by public perception and legitimacy, visible inequality creates incentives for reform. Therefore, we urge you to vote for CG.
Judge, at the core of this debate, there are two things to evaluate: fairness, how awards judge performance, and diversity, who actually gets recognized. I will do two things in this speech. First, I'll provide rebuttal to government, then I will weigh this debate comparatively to show why side opposition wins in regards to gender equality and diverse visibility. First, government tells you that removing gender categories creates a more meritocratic judging system. The only evidence they give of this is the assumption that judges will evaluate performances without bias the moment categories are merged. Now, we have one response here. First of all, we will challenge the factual legitimacy of that claim, because bias in media industries is already well documented and persistent. Judges do not suddenly become neutral because the category formally changes. Ask yourself this: if the same industry that already limits who gets leading roles, who gets screen time, and whose stories are funded remains unchanged, why will the final stage or the end of the line of that evaluation suddenly become fair just because we formally changed the categories? The answer is that it would not. The judging pool is still operating within the same cultural preferences, industry norms, and patterns of recognition that have historically favored certain types of performances and certain groups of actors, namely male-presenting actors. When those inequalities carry through into judging, removing categories does not correct them. It simply masks them under a single label of meritocracy, while the same biases continue to shape who is seen as deserving. Opposition's model thus works better because it ensures that performances by women are not evaluated solely against standards shaped by roles that dominate the industry. It preserves a space where those performances are recognized on their own terms, which translates to more consistent visibility and stronger career opportunities over time. Second, they claim that gender awards reinforce outdated binaries and exclude non-binary individuals. I'd like to point out that opposition engages with a more grounded understanding of how institutions evolve here. In response to that, this case obviously operates on a scale. The solution is not to remove the category entirely, but to reform them in time in ways that expand inclusion, such as adding or adapting categories. Abolishing the structure entirely removes recognition for many without guaranteeing a better inclusion for those currently excluded. Third, government claims that gender identity shouldn't play a role in the art industry as distinctly different categories. They also offer the argument, why not create categories based on race as well then? I'd like to point out that this is irrelevant to the burden of this debate. The motion asks whether we should abolish gender categories, not whether we should redesign the entire award system across every possible identity. We want to add another layer of analysis here by grounding this in the current status quo of the film industry. The argument about gender not playing a role in performance art fundamentally unravels because government has yet to prove that performance can be evaluated on a single neutral standard across all roles. This is simply not how the industry functions. Equality is improving, yes, but in reality, male and female actors are systemically cast in different kinds of performances. I won't be taking that POI. Male leads are far more likely to be written as action-driven protagonists or in roles that center around dominance and control, while female leads, on the other hand, are more often written in relational or emotionally intricate roles where the performance is carried through internal conflict and interpersonal dynamics. Is this necessarily fair? No one can answer that for sure, but it is the reality of the industry. This is not opposition claiming that one gender is inherently different or unequal. It is recognizing that the industry as it currently exists distributes roles unevenly and defines great performance in ways that are already shaped by those structures. In other words, evaluation is contextual, and gendered categories respond to that context by ensuring that different forms of performance are recognized on their own terms, making it a necessary structure. Now, on fairness, I want to take closing opposition's point further by clarifying how award systems actually function within the industry. Government's case misses a key piece of context. Awards are still the end of the line. They are a product
Why?
of the industry, not something that fully shapes it. I won't be taking that POI. What gets nominated is already determined by earlier stages. For example, what scripts are written, who gets cast, which projects receive funding, and how much visibility a performance is given. This matters because government assumes that changing the structure of awards will reshape the industry itself. But that only works if awards are the primary driver of those decisions, which they are not. The pipeline of opportunities is formed long before awards come into play, and that pipeline is where most of the inequality exists. So even if you merge categories, you are still drawing from the same uneven pool of performances. The underlying distribution does not change, and closing opposition contribution then is to show that you cannot fix upstream inequality by altering a downstream mechanism alone. Panels, when weighing the practicality of our model, opposition side of the House wins in providing a more workable path that allows inclusion without sacrificing recognition. As my MO has clarified, categories can be
Why?
adapted or expanded to accommodate performers. I won't be taking that POI. To accommodate performers outside the gender category, while award systems can allow individuals, whether they are male or female, to choose how they wish to be recognized. This retains the benefit of distributed recognition while addressing exclusion more directly. We show you that bias persists, and in government's world, it becomes less visible and more concentrated. Opposition offers a model that, while somewhat imperfect, ensures continued recognition across different groups and maintains a structure that can be reformed and improved on rather than removed entirely. For these reasons, we are proud to stand on side opposition. Thank you.